Think of like a BBC for AI or a PBS for AI, instead of the world where power in this industry is concentrated within maybe 2 or 3 companies in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Right? What Web3 is giving us, because of the data infrastructure that we kind of just get for free, that would take potentially, millions and tens of millions of dollars of investment to get us to. One way of describing what Metagov actually is it's really just a bunch of researchers and hackers held together by a Slack and some vibes.
The internet doesn't have to be shitty.
We don't need to take the internet down this path of inshitification.
Yeah.
It is a choice we can make.
The advantage of, AI and the math field is that you don't have to deal with people a little bit. You can just progress in certain ways. It's mind-blowing and horrifying at the same time.
Discoveries like, the invention of open source, right? That was a fundamentally new way of producing useful stuff in the world that nobody had seen before.
Hey guys, what you're about to watch is one of the many interviews I took during my time in Thailand for Devcon 2024. I was in the country for a total of over a month and got the opportunity to meet a bunch of really cool people and interview them in person. Devcon itself was an incredible and interesting experience, and you can find my full review of it on my Patreon. So if you like the content I've been making and would like me to continue going to these kinds of events and improving, then I hope you'll become a patron starting at just $3 per month for access to loads of bonus content and Blockchain Socialist merch at patreon.com/theblockchainsocialist.
Hi everyone, you're listening to another episode of The Blockchain Socialist with much higher production value than I'm ever going to get in my life. Here at Devcon 2024 in Bangkok. I am Josh, and I am here with my interviewee, Josh. Josh Tan. This is the takeover of the Joshes on this episode. Josh, you're the founder of Metagov, which is also the sponsor of my hat. And as well, just to be transparent and honest, kind of my boss at DAOstar, if that counts.
Very flat hierarchy.
My co-collaborator at DAOstar, where I work part-time as well as the grant standard lead. Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit, just to take advantage of this amazing set. I can talk about that work. But to start off, maybe we can just talk a bit about, one, I think your story is really fascinating because you do too many things and I don't know how you do it. And so maybe I think if you can give a high level introduction of all these things and what Metagov is, and then we can go from there into very spicy takes about AI and blockchains.
Sweet. Let's do it. Well, first off, thanks for having me. So my story, I guess, or why the hell I do what I do. Honestly,
maybe you can just list off the things high level.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously one of the things I work on is Metagov. So Metagov is a nonprofit research lab that specializes in digital governance, and I should say especially in digital self-governance. It's like how do online communities govern themselves. And as part of this, we do a lot of different research across a lot of different spaces. So we're funded, for example, by the Ford Foundation, Sloan Foundation, to do research on sort of how we can model and sort of calculate the costs of transitioning from, let's say, a closed source product into an open source product, or from a BDFL, like a one person running an open source repo, to many people running a repo. Right? So what is the cost and the risk of going from point A to point B? We do a lot of work within AI. So and I guess I in particular help lead one of our projects called Public AI, or AI's public infrastructure. And the idea of public AI is that, maybe AI should be offered kind of like, we offer or support public goods like public libraries or public highways or public parks. Think of like a BBC for AI or a PBS for AI, instead of the world that we seem to be sort of trending toward right now, where power in this industry is concentrated within maybe 2 or 3 companies in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, I do I and Metagov, we do a lot of work in DAOs and blockchains. By some measures, we probably do the most research on DAOs of any organization in the world, inclusive of any university. And part of that involves running DAOstar, which is the standards body for DAOs.
Yeah, which DAOstar is the project that I'm also working part-time at as the grant standard lead. I guess DAOstar, if I can describe DAOstar, I just think of it as a body for creating standards for DAOs, largely technical standards. But I think maybe there is room to think about other types of standards, maybe besides technical ones. I think would be interesting at some point. But yeah, I think the kind of like big thing that is coming up with DAOstar is the grant standard, which I'm leading, in which we have a standard to, I think in short, just like improve the transparency and interoperability of the Web3 grants ecosystem, making grants data public information so that we would be able to actually do the analysis of what's going on in these Web3 grants programs, where that money is coming from, where that money is going, and build the foundations for more robust types of maybe like governance systems around grants, reputation systems, hopefully not in a dystopian way.
Common applications.
A common application, yes, is another big one. So imagine writing one application for 100 grants or whatever else, and just like massively reducing the amount of time you have to spend on grants, which, yeah, I think is important in part because I do think that like there is, in order for a side of the crypto space or Web3, whatever we want to call it, space, to have a space that is different than the VC-backed side of crypto, then we do need to compete to some extent of like allowing people to receive grants in like a way that is not so cumbersome that people just say, fuck it, I'm going to get venture capital.
Yes. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons I think we absolutely need this grant standard. And honestly, you more than anyone, I think I've seen the response we've gotten from this ecosystem, where it's like everybody we talk to, whether it's like one of the co-founders of Optimism, or Owaki from Gitcoin, or Stellar, or Octant, or like everybody agrees, like this is so necessary, and it's kind of like obviously necessary, right? Like,
yeah.
Like it would be amazing if we had this, and now hopefully we're getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe like another way of maybe like putting into like understanding the scale of this, like what we could actually accomplish. This is something that traditional foundations have been trying to do for like 60 odd years, right?
Yeah.
Like every 10 years or so, the Rockefeller Foundation or like Sloan Foundation or one of these like big, well-funded foundations says like, oh, we should do something like this. We should have like a common application across our organizations. And they say like, let's do it. And then they do it, it fails invariably. And then like 20 years later, they forget the failure and they try it again. I think we're actually have a much better shot at getting something that's truly scalable, at realizing this interoperable vision for grants, because of what Web3 is giving us, because of the data infrastructure that we kind of just get for free that would take potentially, millions and tens of millions of dollars of investment to get us to.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I think there is something, at least for the best sides of crypto. I think there's there is like a desire largely within the space for coordination between each other that doesn't really exist in most traditional industries or spaces, however you want to call it. So I think there is something to take advantage of, at least now, while the feeling for collaboration is still hot, to do that. But so yeah, I think standards for DAOs, very important because of all these things we just mentioned. But I really want to take like a step back on like broadly this idea around the need for collaboration in the crypto space. If you have any thoughts on it, at least I guess the Metagov does a lot of things around online governance, but I imagine that in part comes from a place of like feeling that we do need to coalesce around certain standards and certain like maybe shared practices within the internet space in a similar way that I'm now forgetting the names, of course, the other standard bodies of the internet have done before us?
So I think standards are definitely a big play within Metagov. We run not one, but two standards bodies, actually. One of the other ones is called ComTech. So there's a project within Metagov called the ComTech Foundation, which publishes standards for, tech that is actually respectful of your attention. And more broadly, Metagov, kind of what draws people to Metagov one way of describing what Metagov actually is it's really just a bunch of researchers and hackers held together by a Slack and some vibes. It really is deeply informal in a way, and people kind of hang out because it's a community of people who really love building communities, especially kinds of online communities, right? Mm-hmm. And standards are very much part of that play. What do you need to get a standard? You're effectively building a coalition of the willing, right? Of people who might be competing with each other in normal circumstances, but have said we care about some common objective, some shared goal enough to say that we're gonna get together and put our energy into writing this piece of paper that I don't own and I'm giving to my competitor. It's for free. You need some sort of coalescing to make that happen. You need that community. I think that's really what's powerful around the communities that we share in Metagov.
Yeah, I think I think Metagov has been able to attract a lot of very smart people, a lot of academics. I think I realized the other day that I've interviewed at least more than half of the board of Metagov, which has been very funny. Not my intention at all. I didn't realize only after when I looked at the board, I was like, oh, they've all been on at some point. It's attracted a lot of people, a lot of researchers. Definitely our get-togethers are more academic and more chill than if you go to a DeFi party in Thailand or something like that. Definitely a different vibe, and a lot of people who are there for very different reasons than maybe the DGen.
Yeah. One of the we've been hosting these tradition of foundation and nonprofit dinners for 4 years now or so, and what I always the way I always introduce it is back in the day, in the early days of Web 1, the legendary Brewster Kahle, founder of the Internet Archive and many other projects, brought together people from the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, from the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, from W3C, which operates the standards for HTML, that was founded by Tim Berners-Lee. These were the founders, the original founders of the internet, and Brewster brought these people together for, on a regular basis, for a chill, no shill, series of dinners to figure out how do we make sure that the internet itself is something that is going to benefit everybody, rather than something that, just a bunch of companies are looking at and figuring out how do I extract the maximum amount of value, right? I think that's the hope of these dinners and these communities and these events that we try to hold, is that try to hold space for, all the people in Web3 that are really thinking who are committed to this idea that this is something that can be actually for the social benefit, that can be for the public good.
The internet doesn't have to be shitty.
We don't need to take the internet down this path of inshitification.
Yeah,
it is a choice we can make.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's something that I say often on my podcast and in my mid-roll whenever I'm trying to sell people to donate to my Patreon. It doesn't have to be used. Crypto doesn't have to be used for entrenching further capitalist exploitation if we put our efforts into it. So if we try to put to recognize the power that we have collectively with us together, we can change the direction and not simply let insert billionaire tech guy here to control half of it or whatever. I think that my feeling is that this is going to become like ever increasingly more important in probably the short term, probably now, potentially with even this new administration coming in the U.S. Because all respect to the already existing like standards bodies, I think they're doing the best that they can. I think there's clearly been, however, like institutification has happened, and there's something to acknowledge. And I think at least the person's work that I go to when I think about this is like Nathan Schneider, thinking about like the ownership and governance of these platforms is actually incredibly important, and not just the underlying like rails of the movement of data. While that is important, one thing that maybe has been kind of a blind spot for a lot of these bodies has been the governance of these platforms, and how do we govern them better and rather than simply allowing them to be these kind of like play toys of very wealthy people in Silicon Valley.
So I was just having a long email thread involving some people, including Nathan Schneider, and maybe the best way I can introduce this subject or this kind of conversation is something that one of my mentors, Lawrence Lessig, used to say, is that, America, and he's focusing on America, but I think it's something we can say about many parts of the world and many industries, is kind of like stuck on this wheel of market power.
Yeah.
It's just, we build monopolies, we make money to further make more money, which ultimately kind of sucks the air out of many of the other kinds of institutions that we care about. Institutions like democracy, let's say, or institutions like, public health. Like, there's this way in which the market, which is like within, I think we can agree that you're the blockchain socialist, not the blockchain communist. That in many ways, like, market dynamics, market forces are a powerful and important component of many societies, right? To have that kind of decentralized decision-making infrastructure or information processing in the Hayek sense. But like, there's a way in which these things can like go out of control, right? And they start to sabotage and undermine the very institutions that make markets function, right? Institutions of the state, of rule of law. And that's the kind of path, this wheel that we sort of like, we can't seem to stop. And I don't know, like when I think about these kind of questions, I like, a lot of times I'm just at a loss. It's just such a huge problem. Like, how do you stop this like giant force of billions of people and trillions of dollars like moving inexorably toward this direction? And I feel like, governance is part of the answer. But I think building is the second part of that answer. Like, how do we build new kinds of institutions, organizations, technologies that can maybe help us, start to peel back direction? How do we like build the tools and start, initializing these movements? At least that's the thought process that we had when we were starting Metagov, that it was not enough to be just advocating for like policy changes within traditional governments and traditional power structures. Right. We needed to be, in some sense, starting our own projects, starting like fresh companies that were organized better, more democratically, or at least in a way that, you could see at the end of the tunnel that this was going to be better for society. That this was actually going to make a difference for humanity rather than just for like this set of like, stockholders and their bottom line.
Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely wholeheartedly agree that we're at a point where the market has kind of like overtaken rule of law, if you want to say it like that, or just like has destroyed or has like chipped away at these kind of like civil institutions that we once like took for granted, I think, to now they're just like completely taken over much of the economy to the detriment, I think, of larger society. And this is particularly true in the just like digital age where things move so quickly and can move so quickly. And my hunch is that with AI, this is simply getting worse. AI is being, potential paperclip machines, things that optimize for a particular thing, and then, having AI agents that can autonomously do whatever they can do over the internet through digital systems, which are so fundamental to so many of our like institutions today, that it can wreak quite a bit of havoc. We were talking earlier today, and I'm curious to go into it a little bit. I really hated this thing that Peter Thiel said, and I've mentioned it before, but I think if I want to like go into the thing that I think is actually, if I go too deeper into it, but to get people's attention, he said, crypto is libertarian and AI is communist, which I think is very ridiculous and completely. But he said it to be like edgy, to be tongue in cheek or whatever. But I think kind of the thing that it gets at, I think for me, it's actually maybe even. I mean, I would argue perhaps you could argue even the opposite, but AI represents to me this potential for just like unfettered positive feedback loops for the accumulation of capital, more so than even that we have today, which can probably exacerbate a lot of inequalities. But blockchains or crypto, however you want to call it, to me it represents governance actually, and that as a space for like being able to invite others to take part in decision making in ways that our institutions are wholly unequipped to do so. And while I think there is still this maybe a little bit of like a technocratic bent in the crypto space that maybe we need to get over, it does like I can see like very much just seeing the things that are being built that we can offer an alternative to people, so that we can add some pumps to pump the brake a little bit on perhaps like unfettered AIs everywhere, trading meme coins and like extracting value whenever they can,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Maybe like I'm gonna maybe put this in a slightly weird way, but so I began my career actually in robotics, and my PhD, at least in the beginning, was actually in AI. It was in theoretical machine learning. It was like proving theorems about like the behaviors of certain kinds of algorithms, learning algorithms, trying to find structure in these kinds of questions. And I ended up leaving AI for, let's say a certain kind of social science, DAOs, collective intelligence. Lots of reasons, which are very complicated for that. But when I think about like these disciplines and how they relate, I think of blockchains and DAOs as very much a question like, we're looking at how humans interact with each other. We're studying collective intelligence of like many, many people kind of like interacting to generate, whether it's a market or a company or a DAO or a blockchain. There's some sort of collective exercise and collective experience. There's like this, this community that's created out of our joint imaginations. But AI is, along with all the other things that it is, and absolutely is, I think, concentrating power in our society. As a field, it's also like, it's a very deep, it is a record of over 80 years and more, I suppose, of people, especially a set of like, let's say like applied mathematicians, trying to figure out how to interact with the world, right? There's this record within sort of the history of AI going from, this good old-fashioned symbolic logical methods to sort of early kinds of robotics to now the sort of modern era of, these giant deep nets that really come down to different ways of interacting with the world, right? These different ways of imagining, this is how I'm going to be in the world. This is what it means to experience and to learn. I think there's a lot of things that we could learn that we, when I say we, I mean like people in blockchain, in DAOs, who are thinking about like how do we design new kinds of institutions that we can learn from the practice of AI over the past 80 years. That I think if we could learn correctly, could fundamentally change and supercharge the way we build institutions today, in fact, the way maybe we build companies, the way we build democracies. I don't think we know what those answers are yet, but I truly believe they are there.
I mean, what do you think? You're saying there are things that we can learn from the history of AI. Mm-hmm. Do you have any specific points you think that are there?
So, like a lot of, okay, so some of these are like direct analogies. You can sort of say, oh, there are different kinds of multi-agent architectures or kind of like ensemble methods within machine learning that are variations and perhaps more sophisticated kinds of voting methods, right? And you can sort of like take these analogies and map them into the way we design institutions and DAOs. Another is sort of like, oh, look at these kind of like generative adversarial networks, right? Where like there's like two agents playing a kind of a zero-sum game against each other, but in a way that's designed to produce something that's better than either could achieve, right? Because they're competing against one another. Or variations of self-play, like when we like train chess agents or StarCraft agents nowadays, we have them play against themselves. These kinds of designs, these kinds of like sort of like differentiable architectures, can be applied, and we can sort of use them to reason about and think about like how do we design multiple institutions? Like within DAOs today, there's this like there's this meme of like this mycelium, this kind of ecological, organic, like cellular network, like different organelles of a DAO interacting with each other, right? There is like parts of AI are thinking about how to like map that, how to construct it so we can better understand it and like tune it in a way so it's actually producing like optimum social good rather than just like all these things competing against each other and going like crazy, right? So these are tools that we can start applying from day one. I think there's a deeper set of things you can unlock if you really understand like how AI has been built from a methodological perspective. This is like a larger set of conversations that I think I like to sort of call like a CERN for collective intelligence or CERN for like the social and behavioral sciences. That has to do with understanding like why the hell has AI like moved so fast and made such progress in the past 20, 30 years, and how can we start replicating that in the social and behavioral sciences, like in how we design institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the advantage of AI and the math field is that you don't have to deal with people a little bit. You can just kind of like, I think it's a bit easier to progress in certain ways, in certain respects. But indeed, I think there's probably a lot to say for like, what are the types of social institutions that autonomous AI agents end up making themselves amongst each other, if we just like let them go a little bit and see if like what kind of learnings there are there. I would love to. I mean, someone must be doing the experiment already. Who is is just making a DAO of autonomous agents and see what happens.
I don't think we've gone yet to DAO of autonomous agents.
Soon. You heard it here first.
Actually, oh man, I actually registered like the DAI.xyz to do actually this, like the decentralized AI,
okay.
but also playing on the DAO. This is like a thing that I think Ori, one of the sort of founders of the org, and I were kind of brainstorming on during the first Uzalu actually. Ultimately didn't happen, but definitely it would be such a fun experiment to run. But there's a lot of this happening outside the blockchain space. I think like I was just talking to a professor at UW. His first name is Max. His last name I cannot remember right now, but he wrote a paper on basically governance simulations with LLMs. And there's a kind of wide range of these kinds of research that are coming out where I have like just a bunch of AI agents that are interacting with each other within some controlled environment, and we're just kind of like playing it off and see what happens. I still believe though, like at the end of the day, these are all as fun and sophisticated as they can sometimes be, they are all just toy models, and there is no replacing the actual real world. At the end of the day, if you want to make progress in these things, you need to be able to run experiments with real people. I think that's the difference between a DAO and some of these like AI test beds.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've just been thinking about too much about AI lately. Just it's been kind of like a theme throughout my time in Thailand a little bit, with something coming up with like the, I don't know if I should mention, like the all the meme coin AI agent stuff is just, it's mind blowing and horrifying at the same time. So just a warning in case you look it up what it is. Be careful with what pictures you look at. But yeah, so I mean, we were also talking earlier. I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on like what you think DAOs ought to be in some way. So like I listened to a talk a couple of days ago from Left Terrace where he said a DAO is not a company, which I completely agree with. A DAO is not a company. It's something else, or it should be something else if you want DAOs to provide some sort of alternative. If a DAO is a company, then we're just recreating the same thing, except now, maybe at least partially untethered to, state regulation, which maybe that's what you want. That's not, I mean, at least I can say that's not what I want.
So I think there are two different perspectives on what a DAO is. And I will make a statement and say like what my perspective is, but I just want to kind of like highlight. There's the movement perspective on what a DAO is. And it's so important to understand like that this is like core to the people who actually build DAOs in many ways. That DAOs need to be decentralized. That they're about offering something that is new to this economy than just traditional corporations. That DAOs are kind of like digital versions of co-ops, right? Like exploring how we can make cooperative structures, union-based structures, communal structures more viable and more competitive, and using technology to do that. So like this is exactly the thesis of people like Sarah Horowitz, who's one of the founders of the Mutualist Society and an incredible person. So there's the movement notion of a DAO. But then there's also the money, right? And I think we have to be honest with ourselves as an ecosystem. Like the reason so many people pay attention to this space is because there are billion-dollar DAOs that are floating around out there that are making a lot of money and generating, I think, a lot of, let's say, surplus that is then going back into both the movement DAOs, public goods, different kinds of things that we care about, right? But like there are these like red-hot engines, economic engines, which are generating and spinning out wealth. And the fact that, these things, these like DeFi, these large DeFi DAOs, which, oftentimes can and look like very corporate, like just like slightly, like if you like just like fuzz your eyes a little bit, like they do start to look a little bit like corporations. I think in many ways they're really not. I think these are both like legit and real perspectives that like a lot of people hold in this space. And like when I sort of look at this, when I'm like putting my hat, like my DAOstar hat on, like I need to say yes to both parties, right? I need to be a representative of the entire DAO space, both the movement and the money, right? Okay, so let me take off my institutional hat and just like put on my Josh hat and like say like what do I think about DAOs, or where do I want them to go?
Let it out.
For me, I am here, and in some sense I'm here like in Metagov, because I want to see, because I think have a much better chance of seeing and discovering truly new forms of organization that have not been seen before in these spaces than anywhere else. Like discoveries like, the invention of open source, right? That was a fundamentally new way of, producing useful stuff in the world that nobody had seen before. That was only possible because of the internet, because of the nature of software. And I want to see more stuff like that, more innovation, more knowledge. And sometimes I think this innovation can look like figuring out, like solving deeply unsexy problems around like how do we coordinate or manage rights and sort of HR kinds of things that I think DAOs could be really good at, right? So DAOs in this sense could be like much better corporations, right? More compliant, more transparent, better governed, more productive. It could also look like, wow, this is like changing the possibilities of governance so that we can have more competitive, bigger scale, cooperative kind of structures that are like giving back to the communities that they serve. That it's in Metagov we like to say like, making democracy at least as available as autocracy. The idea being that autocracy is like pretty easy to implement in tech. Democracy is hard.
Yeah.
But part of the idea of doing research is not that we prefer one or the other. Like sometimes you need like one person calling the shots in a small company, for example, right? But it's like at least making it possible to sort of say like, here's an alternative. Let's see if it could be right, or let's lower the cost of implementing this alternative.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's still the main, for me, the thing that still excites me even when I'm like annoyed with the crypto space is that like blockchains and crypto are a technology for like building institutions, or for building at the very least the scaffolding of institutions to come. And I think we are at or close to an inflection point in which like that history is kind of being made, in which we have the choice to simply double down on the worst things that traditional corporations are doing today, or we can do something different. And I think the do something different side of this argument is much more compelling for just a vast array of people. I think the people who simply want more efficient companies are, they do have like potentially the money on their side, but I don't think that they have like public opinion on their side. And so I think we have this opportunity to offer like just a way to very differently relate to civic organizations through the internet in a way that we simply either haven't been able to yet, or simply have not had the moment in which to transition into something that is more democratic. So I think this is like a lot of what Nathan Schneider talks about in his book Governable Spaces, which I really enjoyed, and I spoke to him about it previously on the podcast. The internet in some ways has been democratizing on some things, on the other side it also has been like a centralizing force for other things as well. So we have now the technology to do it, and we need to out-collaborate the weirdo corporatists in order to make something different.
We need to build.
Yeah, we got to build. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing all your work. And if you want to leave a plug for people, is there anything people should check out, you think, or website or things they should follow? Yeah,
so both Metagov and DAOstar are very open communities. You just go to metagov.org, DAOstar.org. You'll find ways to join our respective online communities and start getting plugged in and actually contribute to some standards.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Come and help me evangelize the grant standard, DAO IP5.
Let's do it.
Yes. All right. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.